Welcome and good evening. Respected Chancellor Rafiq Habib, members of the Board of Governors, President Wasif Rizvi, Zain and Farzana Jeewanjee, members of our community of Mohsineen, esteemed faculty, students, and honored guests. It is indeed truly a privilege to welcome you all today to what is undoubtedly a historic moment in Habib University's short yet monumental journey. The inauguration of the Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam Endowed Faculty Chair in Wisdom and the Humanities. And I think it would be fair to say that the significance of this endowed chair reverberates well beyond the confines of Habib University and perhaps even beyond the higher educational landscape of this country. But before I begin and elaborate, allow me a brief personal introduction. My name is Najib Jan, and I'm assistant professor in the comparative humanities. Associate. Oh, I am an associate. That's right. A while ago. I always think of like full professors and empty professors. So, if you're not there, you're not there. But anyway. Yes, correction. I am an associate professor of comparative humanities at Habib University. And before we commence and continue with today's proceedings, I would like to invite Ali S. Esab, a first-year communications and design student Habib, for the recitation and translation of the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم ذلك فضل الله يعطيه من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Whatever is in the heavens and whatever is on the earth constantly glorifies Allah, the King, the most holy, the Almighty, the all-wise. He is the one who raised for the illiterate people a messenger from among themselves, reciting to them his revelations, purifying them and teaching them the book and wisdom. For indeed they had previously been clearly astray, along with others of them who had not yet joined them in faith, for he is the Almighty, all-wise. This is the favor of Allah. He grants it to whoever he wills, and Allah is the Lord of infinite bounty. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Jazakallah. Obviously associate, but also early onset of Alzheimer's apparently, and getting old. So I'll need my glasses. I was trying to do it without glasses. I'm like, no, don't. So anyway, as you all very well know, an endowed chair is one of the highest academic awards that a university can bestow on any scholar. It is both an honor to the named individual and holder of the appointment, and also an enduring tribute and a legacy of the donor who establishes it. But the Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib Endowed Faculty Chair in Wisdom and the Humanities is not only the first endowed chair in the humanities in Pakistan, and to the best of my knowledge, there is no endowed chair anywhere in any Pakistani university in the humanities or the social sciences. But more significantly, it is also the first endowed chair in wisdom traditions and humanities in the world. That's a big deal. And it is indeed a tremendous honor and privilege, an incredible gift that this chair is being housed in the comparative humanities program at Habib. As a faculty member within this program, I am confident that the establishment of this endowed faculty chair will further advance the intellectual fabric of Habib University and strengthen our core commitments to Yosin. What a magnificent opportunity, and a heartfelt congratulations to us all. But allow me, I have a brief 5 minutes to set the stage for this evening's proceedings. And I'd like to draw on an idea, an image really, from a famous British sheikh, Elton John, the sheikh of British rock music, that is, who is known in his local habitus as Elton John. The image or metaphor that I am drawing on comes from the title of one of his more famous songs, Candle in the Wind. Now, yes, I'm well aware that this whole candle light metaphor is for education. You know, the idea of light as illumination is a bit dépassé, a bit of a stale and worn out trope, but bear with me for a minute. I mean, it could have been worse. I could have been quoting from Auria Maqbool Jan instead of Elton John. But anyway, in thinking about the challenging mission of a liberal arts university in Pakistan, we might indeed have already imagined this particular image for pedagogy and education as a candlelight. But we don't often think about the wind. The wind here in this metaphor is obviously the storm of progress, this age of abandonment in which we live, which is a time of great global devastation and disenchantment, severing us from the promise of any livable and meaningful collective future. And here in Karachi, in particular, to just get real, I need not elaborate on the depth and often suffocating challenges that surround us. Problems of institutional decay, the threat of economic collapse, staggering poverty, massive environmental degradation, political violence. You know the story of despair very well. I don't need to really elaborate. So let's be honest, we live in a broken world. There's no sugarcoating that fundamental fact. So that is obviously here in this metaphor, the wind, right, which is increasingly taking on gale force proportions, which is now global, as are arguably, of course, its origins. But what about this candlelight? What is the light and what is the candle in this metaphor? Perhaps the Chancellor, the Board of Governors, and our inspiring and indefatigable President, they are the light. I hate to suggest this, and I'm genuinely sorry, but I don't think you are the light. You are, of course, essential to the candle itself. Maybe we could even say that you are the wick of the candle, the body and substance that facilitates the lighting of this light. And I can't believe that you all just shrugged off me calling the President a wick. Okay, in all fairness, I think...
Maybe assistant professor.
For now. And I think, but in all fairness, obviously to Wasif, certainly goes beyond this mere analogy. I think undoubtedly is also akin to the match that must light the flame, the spark, so to speak. So my question then, but what is the light, right? Is it the administration? Again, with all due respect and apologies, Dr. Amir Hassan, Salman, others, the administration is not the light. But instead, it is what maintains the very structure and form of the university, the body and structure of the candle, if you will. You know, it's good wax, good quality wax, it burns well, etc., etc. Of course, keep in mind that the candle, the wick, and the match, these are all essential conditions for the possibility of lighting a flame. But they are not itself the flame. So again, what is this light? The students, you say, they are perhaps a light. Well, unfortunately, they are also not the light. They are perhaps more like the warmth that the candlelight emits. They go out into the world with energy, vision, and a potential to transform their environments. So again, what is this light? The faculty. The faculty are not the light. Sorry, comrades. A bit of a disappointment there. We are not the light. And as I mercilessly beat this tired metaphor like a dead horse deep into the ground, it might be said, at its most charitable, that the faculty are perhaps merely potential conduits of the light, those that are capable of initiating and transferring its warmth to our students through teaching and research. So what is the light? And I bet you didn't see this coming from a mile away. The light is, of course, hikmah. It is wisdom. And it is precisely for this reason, in an age of proliferating darkness, the Anthropocene, global warming, rising fascism, the indistinction between democracy and dictatorship that so haunts our own political landscape. It is in this context that today's event and the establishment of this position take on an even greater clarity and significance. Now, before you protest and think it rude of me not to talk about the role of our generous benefactors with this exalted metaphor of illumination, let me highlight the critical significance of Zain and Farzana Jeewanjee's intervention here. Because the wind is real, right? It's not abstract. We feel it in our bones every day. This wind is real. And so the Jeewanjee's magnanimous and essential role in enabling this endowment is like a shield that protects this light from being extinguished. It protects this light from the storm that has now reached alarming levels of destructive intensity and which threatens to snuff out the very light of potentiality that the university embodies, threatening to destroy and overturn everything that we hold dear. Without such a shield and forms of support, this beautiful mission at Habib remains imperiled. The endowments cultivate and protect an open space where the possibility and potential of wisdom may be realized. It is, of course, by no means an easy task. And surely, if we can be certain of one thing, our world is in dire and desperate need of wisdom, to recover what we can of our inheritance and to allow it to speak anew to the devastating march of techno-capitalist modernity. But what is wisdom? Don't ask me. Whose wisdom? Which voices are authorized to speak? What does wisdom really mean and signify? And the real question, I think, is not even what is the light, but rather what is the source of this light? And it is precisely from this source that I think the modern world has been increasingly alienated and disconnected. And this is the singular task of the comparative critical humanities enterprise, which at minimum needs an open and protected space in which such thinking and meditation can indeed become possible. There is a growing recognition in the academic study of philosophy and beyond that the world's essential, sapiential, that is, wisdom traditions, are essential to the humanistic, cognitive, and ethical inheritance of humanity. And these traditions assume a significance at this critical juncture. The recent turn, for instance, towards ontology, or what some are calling the ontological turn in philosophy and the social sciences, I think much on par with the 1980s linguistic turn, which was also a phenomenal event within the broader academic landscape. I think the ontological turn is a recognition, at least intellectually, of this need to reconnect, rethink the nature of the real with which we have been divorced. And for facilitating and enabling this space, I would once again like to thank the Jeewanjees for bestowing on us this incredible gift and opportunity. A round of applause. I've overstayed my welcome. So to add actual gravitas and depth to this discussion, I am honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Sajjad Rizvi, who is a renowned intellectual historian with deep interest in Islamic philosophy, Quranic interpretation, and contemporary exegesis. Dr. Rizvi completed his BA and MA in modern history, as well as his MPhil in modern Middle Eastern studies from the University of Oxford. He received his PhD in Oriental Studies from the University of Cambridge. And Dr. Rizvi worked as a lecturer at the University of Bristol before moving to the University of Exeter, where he is now a full professor, unlike the empty professors that we... a full professor, full associate assistant for those who aren't, the ranking. But He is, of course, a prodigious scholar with an impressive list of scholarly publications that would take too long to rattle off here, but without further ado, I'd like to request Dr. Rizvi to please take the stage and share his thoughts, relevant obviously to today's inauguration, on the role of hikmah in cognitive reparation today. Please join me in giving Dr. Rizvi a warm welcome.
Thank you for those kind words. Thank you for this invitation. And the reason why I'm a full professor is because I've played a good game. As we all know, this is how it works. Academia is a game. You've got to stick with the rules, and then once you're a full professor, you can pretty much do what you want. So I could probably just tell a few jokes and leave it at it. And anyway, I will say something more than just that. Before I do start, let me just say one thing, which is when I was thinking about whether I should come, and some people know the circumstances of this, I was minded to remember something that my mother said to me a long time ago, which is, okay, so you've been doing this for a while, you've been acquiring knowledge in her old-fashioned way. That's what she thought we were actually doing, acquiring knowledge. When are you actually going to give something back? When are you going to give something back? When are you going to speak to more than just your small group of students? When are you going to be relevant to the wider world? So I hope in one sense this is a way of giving back. And I would like to think it is linked to something which I've been very much committed to in the last few years, which is to continue the progressive stages that Najib was talking about, the decolonial turn. The decolonial turn where we really think about what it is that we're doing and how it is that we are very much rooted in our thought, in our practice, where we have certain ethical commitments and responsibilities which arise from what it is that we know and how it is that we engage with our students. And not only the classroom, but also beyond the classroom. We're all aware of contexts in which we work, which have their different challenges, whether it's in Karachi, whether it's in London, Exeter, and so forth. So it's my comments are very much within that context of a decolonial turn. The other thing which I was minded when I was listening to, of course, the tilawat as well as Najib's comments was, I could actually have just spoken about that Quranic verse and another verse which I was thinking about when you were talking, which is the famous light verse. And the reason why I think the light verse metaphor is better than the somewhat kind of, I don't know, it's like cliched almost, that song. It always reminds me of Diana and those traumatic days in the summer of 97 when we were grad students kind of wondering what to do. And the reason why the light verse actually is better is because the oil of the lamp is never extinguished and the light never goes out, and also it's neither of the east or the west. So it's this idea that the light which is being kindled and constantly kindles, it adds more and more, it is never extinguished, is truly global. And that's what I think we really need to think about, is when we're trying to think about hikmah and what it can mean for us as a practice and how it can kind of heal and repair us in these times, we need to think about how it's global. And that is ultimately what decoloniality should be about. And that, I think, is ultimately what we should be doing in the study of the humanities. We need to think about how the formation of the human, what it means to be a human, is a truly global endeavor. It's a global endeavor which is informed by lots of different cultural traditions. But those cultural traditions increasingly come together. They have elements of divergence because we are engaging constantly. We're talking to each other in different languages. And I sometimes, I've said this before as well, I'm speaking in English in Karachi, and that makes sense within the context, but I would, in some ways much prefer if I was speaking in Urdu or in another vernacular, because then I will reach so many more people. And that's what we should be encouraging. These sorts of conversations, these proper global decolonial conversations have to happen in lots of different languages concurrently. They cannot be just engaged in English, in French, in German, in these sort of global colonial languages ultimately. And then if we want to make English a decolonial language, that has some other really interesting challenges for it as well. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to start with if we think about hikmah traditions, I'm not going to call them wisdom traditions because I think hikmah actually, I'll come to this question of what it means or what I think it means, lots of different senses, but in some ways it actually maps a lot better on the humanities than it does on anything else. If we think about how it was studied historically, yes, at one level it means philosophy and it means a particular philosophical tradition which comes from the Greeks into Arabic and Persian and so forth. But as we heard in the Quranic recitation, God is described as Al-Hakim, and what the Prophet teaches, one of the things that the Prophet teaches is also described as being hikmah. So it can't just mean, for example, Aristotelian syllogistic reasoning, because that would be far too narrow. That is not, regardless of what some people think, that is actually not a universal thing. That is a very particular cultural tradition. So it has to mean more than that. And ultimately, when we see the expression of that hikmah in things like our poetic traditions in different languages, we realize that what is at core is an understanding of reality, and also then concomitantly an understanding of how we should be in this reality and how we should engage with others in that reality. How it is that we encourage the sorts of values so that that person can be truly reflective of that hikmah and can impart and spread it to others. You know, the whole idea of being, this is what I think is the real notion of a useful human being. A useful human being, of course, is someone who literally helps people materially, but the most useful person is someone who actually takes you by the hand and shows you how to be a human. And that, I think, is a very powerful thing. That is that sort of guidance which, you know, ultimately some of us probably do aspire to when we're in the classroom. We like the idea that we're actually taking our students on a journey which is going to improve them, maybe not on the kind of rather pompous sense of so that they can be like us. I mean, I really hope they don't become like us in some cases, but so that they can actually go somewhere and be more than who we are. You know, I'm minded of the old thing, you know, a parent is someone who really wants their children to be more than who they are. So a good teacher should also be like that. A good doctoral supervisor, etc., should be someone who really wants their students to go far beyond what they were capable of doing. Before I come say a bit more about that, and I'm aware of time and I can kind of go on and someone has to stop me at some point, let me just say a few things about why it's important to speak about hikmah traditions before I say something about what I think they are, and then I'll end with some comments on how that study, that praxis can be reparative. I think that the first point to think about is the reason why we need to engage with that is because it's something which, on the whole, we have lost. There is this sense of loss with respect to hikmah. There is a sense in which when people, I think, come across this verse in the Quran, the very fact that they have to ask, what can this possibly mean? And have no sense of actually even arriving at the answer, that gives you a sense that we've lost something. And we've lost that for a number of different reasons. One of them is the classic decolonial diagnosis, which is it comes out of colonial epistemicide. It's the way in which coloniality has actually destroyed our intellectual and cultural traditions. Right? Now, the classic example is 1857. Those of us who are familiar with or come from this kind of British context know that deeply. It's of course something which still affects places like Pakistan, because Pakistan is very much a product of that colonial destruction in 1857. And it wasn't just literally about killing people and bringing down a rebellion. It was also about the fundamental destruction of madrasas, of sites of learning, of salons. I mean, huge swathes of old Delhi were just destroyed. Libraries were looted and burnt. So epistemicide is about the destruction of traditions, by killing those who are teaching, by destroying their institutions of teaching, by destroying their libraries, and also by dislocation. So The things that were looted were then taken off, and they are, of course, available in the British Library in London and in many other places, and in the Bodleian in Oxford and other institutions. And that dislocation means that those who are of the place are deracinated from that. They are deprived of that tradition. And so there has to be a way in which, how do we then reacquaint people with that? And another element of that is that one of the ways in which, so those traditions were not just elite traditions. And one of the most important ways of understanding how they were not just elite traditions which were based around certain teachers of philosophy, for example, is that those ideas about what hikmah were then disseminated primarily through the poetic traditions, which I've already mentioned. And so those poetic traditions were popular. They were those verses in various languages, whether they were Persian or the vernaculars of North India, were disseminated. People knew those verses. People were familiar with the ideas, even if they hadn't actually read texts on that in the particular madrasa. And that increasingly, again, once you change the educational system, once valued and privileged education is done in English, then the question is, how do people engage with those things? How do they remember the adab, so to speak, of their forefathers if that's not something which is present in any living form before them, and is not something which they are reminded of consistently? And that displacement of an educational system brought with it different kinds of values. So values around material progress. What is success? Success is measured in slightly different ways. So success is not just this idea of becoming human, but success is around the basis of being fabulously wealthy, or being or having lots and lots of degrees, which one of those kind of classic problems for all of us is that on the one hand we recognize that these are hoops that you jump through which recognize success, but at the same time you have to have some process of doing this. There's that sense of the change of the definition of success and progress. And alongside that, what I want to also say, perhaps as an important caveat, is to remember that it's not just, we've lost something which is really great. If only we could go back to that, we would be in a much better position to deal with the world as we have it. And that's because the sense of that loss, that perhaps nostalgia for it, is not necessarily a negative thing. Because what is on the whole not prevalent, and what seems to be absent, still retains certain traces. And the only reason why something like hikmah and the broader sense of what it means to be human can have a relevance today is because we still have glimpses of those continuities and traces in different places. Now, one thing I always say to students is that the best place to see these glimpses is at shrines. Real shrines, not sanitized awqaf run shrines, such as in Pakistan. I mean, it's unfortunately I went to Abdullah Shah Ghazi last night, and it was quite shocking. It's almost completely devoid of any spirituality as far as I can see nowadays, which is a real shame because there's a real Imam Zadeh actually buried there. You will see that at actual shrines. If you want to see what it means to be human, how people engage with each other, how they teach by being, how they teach by hospitality, by showing you how to do things, by simple acts of generosity, you see that at shrines. And this is universal. This is not something which is specific to a particular religious tradition. It's true of every kind of shrine you can imagine, in every place across the world. So those pockets still exist. And so they kind of invite us to really think about what it is that we want to do, how we want to do. Now, coming back then to what we mean by wisdom and what sort of things can we perhaps teach, at least in a in a theoretical manner before we then think about certain elements of practice as well. Well, there are lots of definitions which are given for hikmah in the different traditions. We have the definitions which are, for example, in the Quran. The most famous definition of hikmah in the Quran is Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 269, where hikmah is defined as a free act of grace, a divine gift. And it's a divine gift which is defined as the great good, or the greatest good. So here you have the notion of hikmah associated specifically with good, and that then of course has a metaphysical aspect. It also has an ethical aspect. It's related to value, but it's also related to our foundation. And it's also described as being kathir, which means abundant. So it's, coming back to the metaphor of the lamp and the light in the light verse. This is something which is not extinguished. It doesn't run out. It's constantly giving. It's constantly giving. It's constantly building upon the other. And that's, in many ways, that's really how we should understand education. Education is not something which you kind of, you fill a person's mind with something, but it's actually you develop that flame so that it spreads and spreads, and it never extinguishes. You don't give of yourself to someone. You still have what you have, and that process augments yourself and also increases the other person as well. So that's one sense of it. The other definition which is often given, and this is particular both in the saying of the Prophet, and it's also a famous saying of Amir al-Mu'mineen, it's something which is expressed as dallat al-mu'min. Dallat al-mu'min literally means the lost property of a believer, a trusting believer. I mean, there's this whole other question about whether mu'min is something very narrow in the Quran or not, and there's a debate in the study of early Islam precisely on this. But if we take it in the broader sense, mu'min is someone who has absolute trust in God. And there are many people in different traditions who could be defined as such. But it's this idea of a lost property there. And lost property in the sense that it's something that you will come across, and it's lost because it's then about how you remember that, yes, this was what we were about. I mean, without getting very Platonic about it and saying, oh, this is just reminding ourselves. In a sense, it is Platonic, but it's Platonic because it's also Quranic. There's another famous verse in Surah Al-A'raf about God pulling the spirits of everyone out of the loins of Adam and saying, am I not your Lord? And the spirits said, yes, of course you are. And there's a whole commentary on what that includes. So basic metaphysical realities, basic ethical realities, the idea is that we knew this in some way in our prehistory. And so when we then reacquaint ourselves with it, this is truly encountering the lost property. It's truly encountering something that we had before and we need to bring back together. And then there's various other things. I mean, there are lots of wisdom sayings as it goes in texts like the Nahj al-Balagha, the famous collection of the sayings, sermons, letters of Amir al-Mu'mineen. It's still an astonishing shame that there isn't a decent translation of that, either in English or in Urdu for that matter. Why do we not actually read that text? Why do we not actually make that part of a curriculum? Why do we not actually present that as world literature? This is global heritage. It's global heritage, So it's not just a kind of an act of seeking approval when you say, Ali is not just ours if we're Shi'i. He's not just ours if we're Muslim. He should be a figure for world history. It's world cultural heritage, which is absolutely critical there. And then aspects of that take us into elements of other sorts of sciences. And I'll mention just one. How many people here have heard of the qasida or the dua Jaljalutiyya? Anyone heard of Jaljalutiyya? Okay, well, I would expect you to. I'd be surprised if you didn't. So the Jaljalutiyya it's used as a prayer. It's supposed to be a poem composed by Amir al-Mu'mineen, And particularly Sunni Shadhalis use it as part of their practice. So in terms of the way it's been disseminated, it is disseminated in the Sunni Sufi circles. And it's considered to be a very powerful way of becoming. It's a way in which you protect yourself in this world. It's sometimes associated with other things known as, for example, Hizb al-Bahr, which is also a very famous dua of protection. But the idea is that the repetition has, the words of it have an effect which is transformative. It goes back to this idea that we have with the ancients, whether it's the ancient Indians or whether it's the Neoplatonists, that words are switches which activate certain elements of the soul and open that soul up to becoming. And so the Jaljaluti acts as that as well. So wisdom in that sense is not just this narrow, hikmah in this sense is not just a narrow issue of philosophy. It becomes a different way of understanding the world and the self, which then crosses over in what we, I guess, would call the occult. And I will just give you one final definition, which is a much more narrow one. In some ways, it's a slightly more narrow one, which comes out of the philosophical traditions. And this is a famous definition given by the person I've worked on a lot, Mullah Sadra, in the 17th century, where hikmah is the process of perfecting the self. The process of perfecting the self through the acquisition of knowledge about reality. Knowledge about reality insofar as it truly is. And that knowledge is acquired both syllogistically, but it's also acquired intuitively, and it's also acquired by how it is that we are, how it is that we behave, how it is that we become. And the reason for doing that, and that is both theoretical and practical, it's about metaphysics and ethics, is so that we can become godlike. And the process of becoming godlike is so that you can see the totality of cosmos as it truly is, and you can make the right sorts of decisions and evaluations for how it is that you should be and how others should, how you should be with others. I was going to say how others should be, but no, that's not the point. It's about the self. You've got to always start with the self. It's the responsibility. And so it's really about that kind of holistic sense of looking at the sources of hikmah, as you mentioned earlier, Najib, and looking broadly at the sources. Philosophical, syllogistic reasoning, intuitive reasoning, tasting, what the Sufis would call kashf or mukashafa, the unveiling of realities to you, the way in which you act and behave, the effecting of spiritual exercises, ascesis in that sense, which makes the totality of the person. And as I mentioned earlier, that one of the most powerful ways in which you really see this in practice is go to a shrine, read some poetry, or sit in a mehfil of poetry or of qawwali or something like that. That's where you really, as you say, encounter the face of the divine. And that's where humans are really made. Now, of course, our task is then, how do we bring that, how do we bring that to our students? How do we bring that to the wider world? How do we make that pursuit of hikmah truly global, meaningful for everyone? So we have to have instruments of communication across different cultures. And as we know, music is a very important element of that communication. One thing which strikes me as being astonishing is how, in many ways, not just our students, but we ourselves often are massively culturally illiterate. Poetry, music, all sorts. I mean, we all have musical tastes, but they tend to be very partial. Right? So, and those tastes sometimes are very difficult to communicate to others. So, actually knowing what music is and how it works and how it is that it communicates across barriers, I think is a very important element of it. It's something which is absolutely essential. The basic, a basic aesthetic appreciation of art and understanding how central artistic expression is also to the understanding of hikmah. It's a much more holistic thing. It's how people behave. It's what they think about in terms of reasoning. It's how they experience the world around them. It's how they then try to inscribe the world around them through artistic composition. Now, that seems like a very tall order. But all we can do is make an effort and start on all these things. We have to think as broadly as possible in terms of what hikmah is, and then try and sample lots of things, give people tasters of things so that they will then think about what it is they want to do. A true training in the humanities ultimately has to have that sort of sampling. The humanities as they exist today are massively compartmentalized. Often different disciplines have a rather esoteric set of terminology that they use, which is either meaningless to others or actually means completely different things using the same words for other people. What I would say is that we need to think a bit beyond that, kind of at a meta humanities level, about thinking about how these things actually link together. If we want to talk about what does it mean to be human, how do we integrate these different elements to it? How do we integrate the poem with the sensual experience of a visitation somewhere, with the reading of a particular argument, and so on and so forth? And that's that kind of much more holistic approach, which, I would argue is something which we have lost. This is precisely why, the generation up to, say, my grandfather would have had a familiarity with the works of Sa'di, because Sa'di for many centuries was taught precisely for this purpose of what it means to be human, and the way in which Sa'di taught this was through a mixture of argumentation, telling stories, poetry, sometimes scientific observation, and so forth. Because there was a sense in which the notion of becoming a human and understanding it and disseminating it was a truly universal endeavor. And I think that's that element that we need to think about in the final analysis. The way in which that integration can be healing, because it introduces people to possibilities for the future. The very hope that something can be improved, I think, is important. Not the hope that we can suddenly fix, like, global warming, or that we can suddenly colonize Mars or some other crazy idea like that, but rather that we can actually heal ourselves by actually thinking about, well, what does it mean to be human? And humans live and die, and humans suffer, and lots of other things happen, but they can still be effective, they can still be useful, they can still be productive and teaching, they can still be nurturing in this world. They can do those things even in the most kind of extreme blizzard or storm that Najib was talking about, so that we can actually encourage each other towards the good. Again, the Quranic idea, the fundamental imperative on everyone. This is not just about believers in a particular tradition. The fundamental imperative for everyone is to cooperate towards the good. And it's to cooperate so that you can become, as the language of the Shia Hadith says, become an alim Rabbani, someone who knows in the shade of the Lord, knows in a lordly manner, knows in a sort of a nurturing way and acting in a particular way, who can be godlike, who understands the world around themselves. That might have sounded quite preachy at times, but I think we should do that. If you really believe in something, you've got to go out and preach it. I think there are some things which are of extreme significance for us, and that's what we should be presenting to, not just to our students, but to the world outside. whether that's through social media, whether that's through other means. I hope that whoever eventually takes this chair will not just teach in the classroom, but actually will have a very important public service role to play in Karachi, but in the wider context of Pakistan, and even in the world. So thank you for listening.
Adab, everyone. I would also like to start by thanking Zain and Farzana Jeewanjee, Sahib and Saiba, for this. I am in the Comparative Humanities Department, as Najib was telling you. So the chair will be in our department, and it's really an honor and a privilege. It's for us, really, it's not just about us and about Habib. It has, as Najib was already indicating, global implications. Yeah? Because to begin with, if you think about it, I don't mean to reduce it to philosophy, the question of hikmah. As you rightly pointed out, hikmah goes well beyond what we today take to be philosophy. Yeah? But all other traditions, other to the Western tradition, yeah, are today thought of as being ethnic. So if you say philosophy, yeah, you'll have to say Islamic philosophy, Hindu philosophy, Chinese philosophy, whatever it is, African philosophy. So these are all ethnic philosophies. When you just say philosophy, it means Gora philosophy. So Gora philosophy is the universal philosophy. All others are merely relevant to whoever is, for instance, a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Hindu or whatever. Yeah? So there is a monopoly on universality that the West has simply assumed. And we have gone along with that. Yeah? Goras have a monopoly on universality. This is disastrous for the entire world. Yeah? If we are going to be merely ethnic, then obviously what else can you expect us to be? It is precisely the universalist potential, yeah, as Sajjad was also hinting at. I think that's one of the first points of emphasis that you had in your very, very scintillating, as usual. It's very thought-provoking. It's full of insights, yeah, and things to think about that you've offered us. So there are so many things to think about. Some of the things that I wanted to further bring out, and hopefully you'll elaborate on this further. I was recently reading this book about Hannah Arendt, a very important philosopher, Jewish, it's important to say this, Jewish German philosopher. And this book, it's called An Education in Judgment, Hannah Arendt and the Humanities. An Education in Judgment. Notice the way we talk. So, hikmah, also as anybody with an ear used to these things, and this is part of the problem that we have today, is that our ears, so every word has this resonance in our languages. The way Semitic language in general, Arabic also works is that every word has this remarkable gunj, echo, resonance. Yeah? So when you say hikmah, you'll think of hukum, which means judgment. You'll also think of hukumat or hukuma in Arabic, which means government. Yeah? Now today, I've noticed the only place where you will hear judgment is either in the legal context or when people will say, don't be judgmental. As if this were possible at all. Yeah? After all, the question for us is to have good judgment. It makes no sense to say no judgment. Yeah, don't be judgmental. No, don't make bad judgments, make good judgments. Right? And how are we to acquire the capacity for judgment? This is what I want to start with.
That's a very big question. I was thinking, saying to someone, don't be judgmental is a bit like saying, don't have good taste. It's kind of you would never say to someone, don't have good taste.
Right.
So in some ways, if you replace judgment with taste, you get the sense of what's actually going on here. Yes, so that's, I would say a lot of this sense of how we become evaluative creatures is about experiences. As I said, it's about the old kind of adab that we were placed with. And one of those adabs was don't be judgmental in a particular sense of like, don't just dismiss someone because you didn't like the way they looked, or
Exactly.
that they said something which didn't quite accord to your own particular frame of reference, but that you had to accord them the respect to sort of at least assume that they were being reasonable. I mean, I think this one of the big things we seem to have lost is the notion that someone who is speaking to you, who you may disagree with, is actually being reasonable. A proper pluralist has to accept that. And I would argue that most Islamic hikmah traditions are pluralistic in that sense. They will accord that respect even though they might disagree with the outcome for that. And they would especially accord that respect if they're, with an understanding that there is a process through which someone is going, by which they arrived at that. And certainly pre-modern texts are absolutely full of those sorts of expressions about what those ethics are of how you engage with someone with whom you might disagree, or with whose results of the argument that you might disagree. So I think that has to be there. And yes, it is about acquiring aspects of taste. So, the way in which I would say you acquire taste is through experience, is through understanding how something works. It's through the effect that, say, a piece of music or a line of poetry has on you. It's through seeing how it works on others. I mean, I think those, they might seem very subjective, but when they are repeated again and again across different people and different contexts, that at least gets you around one of the problems of objectivity. I mean, objectivity is a different kind of issue that I don't necessarily want to get into, but it's more, how is it repeated? How is something communicated across people, across different traditions and so forth? So that experience is extremely significant. And that experience is something which, on the whole, we are actually quite bad at communicating in the classroom. We're very good at setting reading. In fact, we are almost fetishistic about setting reading. And that's partly because of the way some of us were taught. I remember the first week at university being given an essay title, no reading list. And in those days, our conception was just go and find like a ridiculously long bibliography and try and like kill yourself to read all of this and write a 3 or 4 page piece that you then read out in this strange ordeal of torture in front of someone who then dismantles it and tells you how stupid you are. That is still one very prominent form of education at elite universities, certainly in the British system. So yes, that doesn't actually get you anywhere near this idea of experience. And at the same time, when you look at the sciences, if you told someone studying sciences that they would never do anything hands-on, they would think it was crazy that this was not an education in science at all. So why is it in the humanities we cannot do things which are hands-on? Why is it that the humanities is considered to be entirely abstract, entirely about reading and engaging with a dead word on the page? And I think that's changing. I think that's changing in different ways. Just to kind of, up my students, our students in Exeter, they've written a wonderful decolonization statement recently. And one of the things they've precisely said is we need to think beyond the traditional lecture and beyond the idea that you have a particular set of readings that you have to do for a particular lecture so that you can contextualize and make sense of it, is that necessarily the best way you can understand a particular problem? And that, in a sense, is a challenge to us then, who are kind of convening and leading that class, to think about, so how do we do it otherwise? You know, if we're, for example, teaching ethics, do we really think it makes sense to be speaking purely in abstract terms, or in terms of absolutely ridiculous, hypothetical thought experiments, you know, like the ticking bomb, or like the running trolley, or whatever sort of stupid thing, or brains in a vat, or the Chinese. I mean, these are ridiculous things because they have no actual relationship with reality. Why not engage with something which is much more hands-on, which is actually meaningful, and which then students would actually care about, as opposed to giving them something completely abstract and say, no, this is about you as much as it is about this particular abstract problem.
Thank you. Yes, so you've brought out this word experience. In this word experience, another dimension that you've opened up of the question of wisdom is that in wisdom, this another modern direction or splitting that between theory and practice. So you cannot think of wisdom without thinking, on the one hand, theory, and at the same time, practice. And also, another problem in the modern sort of order of knowledge, which is that knowledge is thought to be, the fact-value distinction, thought or knowledge is thought to be something other than ethics. There's no necessary connection between knowledge and ethics. Wisdom necessarily implies a necessary relation between knowledge and the ethical.
Yeah, so that's again one of those classic things. One's sometimes forced to invoke concepts such as traditional philosophy and say, well, in traditional philosophy, this gap between the is and the ought doesn't exist, and it's considered to be something which is a given. Some of it goes back to really understanding what sort of polemics are going on in Oxford in that particular period of 20th century history, and wondering whether people have just taken this up as if it's obviously true and not really thought about the argument. I think those elements are there. What should philosophy be about? For me, one of the aspects of the decolonial turn is precisely breaking down those sorts of distinctions. So breaking down spirit, matter, breaking down theory and praxis, I think is really quite important to understand that it's much more holistic what one's doing. And it's in that holism, it's in that sort of claim towards the global. I think that's the way in which you're more likely to be successful in moving forward. Whether it's in a particular context, or whether then it's reaching out and then engaging with other traditions which try to do precisely the same sort of thing. It's those binaries which I think are deeply problematic. So, and fundamentally, one element of decoloniality and many other kinds of critiques of the way in which academia works is this notion of positionality. So it's not just who you are in the classroom as a teacher, but for students and others to understand that they need to be aware of who they are as well. And they need to bring that into their understanding. And that is not a bad thing. That's actually something to be celebrated. That will help them to develop their understanding. They should draw upon their own experiences. They should draw upon who they are in terms of their understanding of it. And they should be free to engage that in, the canon that we study. So I've often said this: why do we feel that we have to, for example, apply Kant or Hegel or Heidegger or someone else to the study of Iqbal or Bulleh Shah or whatever? Why aren't we doing it the other way around? Why aren't we doing that? And why aren't we actually opening up more global South-South conversations? There are as many There are many traditions in Buddhism, in Indian thought, in East Asian thought, which I think are very productive conversation partners to the sorts of traditions and hikmah that one has in the South Asian and the broader Muslim context as well.
Thank you. Another thing that you brought out, and which you're gesturing at today, gesturing at right now as well, is the significance of these ambient vernacular traditions and the poetry. So I just want to read out a quote from this Moroccan thinker, Abdul Wahab Meddeb, from Islam and its Discontents. He's otherwise, as you know, problematic, but this is a remarkable testimony. He says, I would say without fear of error that the most precious legacy that may be ascribed to Islam consists in the profusion and intensity of its body of spiritual texts. Its body of spiritual texts, which is once again related to the question of wisdom. We cannot think of wisdom without that dimension. Yeah? This legacy owes as much thanks to the ardor and intensity of its poetic and lyrical sayings. The ardor and intensity of its poetic and lyrical sayings as to the exalted tenor of its speculations. Really very eloquent testimony.
Well, and that actually also speaks to the way in which there is a colonial construction of Islam, which goes back to the 19th century, in which Islam is reduced to law and to particular kind of learned traditions. Not to say that law was not important in the madrasa, of course it was, but that of course is not the be-all and end-all of what the tradition was. It's that reduction which is a problem. It's you know, when you look at the field of Islamic studies more broadly, even if you look at the study of spiritual traditions, if by that one means, say, Sufism, then an extraordinary amount goes into the learned philosophical aspects of Sufism. And then, of course, you have a bunch of anthropological studies of what people do at a shrine. But there is very little sense in which kind of everyday spirituality works, right? You know, what are the devotions that people find meaningful for themselves in an everyday setting, not just actually visiting a shrine, but actually what they just do in their home every day. And those devotional manuals are completely understudied. They proliferate across the Muslim world. It's those books which are most sold on the street. You know, what is an effective supplication for this? What should you do at a particular point in time? How should you, what sort of litany or invocation should you use to relax? What should you do in cases of anxiety? And, you know, everyone suffers from anxiety. And yes, meditation is said for everyone, but there are different ways of meditating, you know. We have our own traditions of meditating, which people seem to have forgotten. So it's those devotional spiritual elements which are massively understudied. And it's astonishing that they are, because those are the things that, you know, as I would say, that's what we learned from our grandmothers. That is, you know, it's the faith of the grandmothers which is really important. This, the devotion, the simple kind of love and compassion and teaching and wisdom. Actually, that is the hikmah of the grandmother, which is like people kind of scoff at it because it might not be learned or it might not be expressed in a text, but it's real and it's meaningful. And it's those things that remain with you through your life.
It's actually what keeps most people going in a very, very difficult world. Yeah, this is precisely the kind of thing that keeps people. I mean, after all, we live in a society in which a very large proportion of the population is very poor. It's precisely this inheritance of wisdom, yeah, because the humanities is not just in books. All of this poetry that's all around us, yeah. और ज़ौक़ जो है सही मानों में एक्चुअली शहर के लोगों का ज़ौक़ इतना अच्छा नहीं है जितना देहातों के लोगों का ज़ौक़ अच्छा है. शहर के लोग जो हैं वो शीला की जवानी सुन रहे होते हैं और वो जो हैं वो शाह अब्दुल लतीफ़ भिटाई और हीर और वारिस शाह वगैरह सुन रहे होते हैं, तो उनका ज़ौक़ जो है अच्छा. Now there's so much to talk about, but already we are running behind schedule, so
and I haven't yet mastered the ability to stop time, so we can't do that.
Yes. So thank you very much for that brilliant and very insightful, characteristically insightful talk, Sajjad.
Thank you so much to both Dr. Rizvi and Dr. Naqvi. I felt awful having to sort of stand there and hurry along. Obviously, we're on capitalist time here. And I would now like to request our El Presidente, Wasif Rizvi, our dear, sincere leader, who's responsible not only for galvanizing this beautiful mission at Habib, but also for being pivotal in the assemblage and the gathering, which is the original meaning of logos, of the word, means to gather. And Wasif has remarkably achieved a gathering of thoughtful individuals, artistic, intellectual, and musicians, and people who are committed to really shaping futures in a sincere way. So, without further ado, I'd ask Wasif, please, to take the stage.
Adab. Thank you, Najib. Wonderful. Your associate professorship for now is safe. Chancellor Rafiq Habib, members of the Board of Governors, Vice President Amir Hassan, Vice President of Academic Affairs Amir Hassan, faculty, students, dear guests, Assalamu alaikum and adab. A special welcome to our phenomenal visionaries who have supported this, the founding of this chair, Zain and Farzana Jeewanjee. Thank you for being here. Since I've just changed my glasses, I can't see very far. So I want to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Asim Shah, who flew in from Houston just yesterday and joined us here. Thank you, Asim. Asim has been the convener of our gala in Houston. One of the reasons that we met Farzana and Zain, so he has something to do with this particular endowment coming through. Thank you, Asim. So, of some of the most famous sayings of Imam Ali regarding wisdom, one of them is, a wise man first thinks and then speaks, but a fool speaks first and then thinks. So we saw the iteration of the former between Najib and Sajjad and Oman, and I'm sorry to be the example of the latter because I'm in the middle of Board of Governors meeting, then I did not prepare many remarks, which actually is good in interest of time. But I do want to talk about the first part of this endowment, which is Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, which actually principally the reason that the actual title of the chair flows out, Wisdom and Humanities. So one of the things that I have always grudgingly praised about Harvard University is their motto, which is Veritas, which is taken from a verse of Bible, Viat Veritas et Vita, which is what Christ said, the way and the truth and the life, they obviously pick just one, which is basically perhaps the most elegant way of acquiring how to live as a human, that should have Iman and engage with truth, which in this case, Hazrat Isa, and then reality or life unveils itself to you. In case of Imam Ali, one of the most famous hadiths about him by Rasulullah which is written right behind. So if we, Zain and I, and Farzana Bhabi and I, we just met at the shrine. So we were there dutifully. That's where this beautiful thing emerged, actually. There's a famous gate which is known as Babu Sa'a or Bab Imam Raza, which is the eastern gate. So the most famous hadith about Imam Ali is written there, which is Ana Madinatul Ilm wa Aliyun Babuha, right on that door, which I think Zain is going to talk a bit about. I'm going to take the second one, which is right at the door, on top of the door of the Rawaq, when you enter the area where Zari is, which is Ali ma'al haq wa haqqul ma'ali, right? So Ali is truth and truth is Ali, or Ali is with truth and truth is with Ali. So which is connected to this question of veritas. Can't think of, perhaps it was meant to happen, the first ever chair in humanities and wisdom and humanities, and wanting to discover this reality and truth and wanting the art of living and a good life had to come from this source, which was preordained by Rasulullah 1400 years ago, that if one wishes to explore any meaning of primordial or real reality, you have to engage with Ali. Ali ma'al haq wa haqq Ali. That hadith is usually read in conjunction with a very famous ayat of Surah Isra, which is the 17th surah of Quran, and its 82nd ayat. وَقُلْ جَعَ الْحَقَّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. So this is that the truth has come and falsehood has vanished, and falsehood was bound to be vanished, right? So this is the same haqq that Rasulullah is talking about. There is a very beautiful ayat just before this ayat, I'm not going to get into that, which does not leave any doubt that this particular verse is about Imam Ali. So his position as at the heart of Islamic tradition of wisdom and truth and hikmah was so well established that well before the 17th, 18th, 19th century model of colonialism, people were worried. The enemies of this burgeoning religion were worried. So it's not coincidental that Dante would place Muhammad and Ali together in the last rung of his hell. So obviously people were observing that even Viking funeral cloth was bearing name of Allah and Muhammad and Ali, as there are recent discoveries. So there is, and this just last 150 years when we have decided to implode and destroy ourselves. There's Najul Balagha, a lot of people know. The other most famous collection of Ali's saying is known as Role of Hikma and Darul Kalam, right? It's compiled by a non-Shia, which literally means the exalted wisdom and pearls of speech, right? So it's compiled by Muhammad al-Tamimi al-Amudi, who by no stretch, and this is a 12th century thinker. So Muslims were converged around this idea that there is something regarding signal towards insight to the greater truth, the ethic to live in this world, to lead a good life, to actually create a sense of what does it mean to be a good Muslim and a good person and an impactful person and a good teacher. All of that in many ways were connected to the traditions that were created by Imam Ali. And almost all Sufi traditions and shrine traditions in Islam continue to trace their lineage and their connection to the inspiration started by him. So I mentioned Dante. I don't know if the British were smart enough or insightful enough to know, but they did something very nefarious in 1861. So the first act, one of the first acts that they passed after 1857 rebellion in 1861 when the Crown took over, that no communal group will participate in the religious observance of another. Right? So they were, and a lot of historians argue that they were very scared of Muharram and everyone's participation in Muharram. So all about 20, 30 different groups within the subcontinent were very engaged and drawn, and the central point of perhaps the most non-contentious figure that Hindus and Parsis and Sikhs and Jains and many they found were around this name, Imam Ali. So it's just last 140 years or so, this violent disruption of engagement of adab and of ethic and of wisdom and of sort of drawing to, as you said, Sajjad said, his grandfather, of course, the way of living, the way of knowing, the way of accessing this idea of truth and haqq and beauty and ethic were connected in very strong ways to this phenomenal personality, reality, which has lived on first a century of slander by his opponents within Islam, and then by what I said, which is the fact that we are celebrating in 2023 and are inspired by his name being attached to wisdom and humanities is beyond miraculous, because there's so many empires that were invested in preventing just that, right? So, and maybe are there currently too, without naming few. So the fact that there is a great reason to be extraordinarily inspired and moved by this is manifest. It's one of the more remarkable things that have happened in the history of academia. It's the first of its kind that has happened in Pakistan. And there is something truly divine about it. Because look at the names, Farzana and Zain. So they literally mean wisdom and beauty. Farzana means the wise, Zain means the beautiful. So the beautiful wisdom, these are the attributes. So if, apart from endowing this chair, anyone who walks into Habib University sees a little description of Yohsan, which is the saying of Imam Ali, Qimatu kulli imri ma yohsanahu, and one of the most resonating, the most echoing aspect of Yohsan is Husn, right? Everyone's beauty is in what they do beautifully. And it was bound to happen that this combination of wisdom and beauty, Farzana and Zain, actually you got that right. So I know the wise one is Farzana, and of course you're beautiful, Zain. So they both came together, and they have allowed us to celebrate something which has been there since the time Rasulullah said, Ali ma al-haq wa haqq ma Ali. So thank you so much for us to be inspired by this truth. Thank you.
Thank you very much again for these inspiring words and thoughts, and digging a little deeper into the significance and worth of this position. I would like now to invite Mr. Zain Jeewanjee to share his thoughts on the importance of philanthropy, and maybe a little bit about why he chose to award this magnificent endowment to Habib University. Thank you.
You know, I had written a speech, and in the car I was practicing it, and I had my son sitting, and I told my son, clock time me to make sure that I stay within. So my habit is, if I take the mic for 5 minutes, I at least take 30 minutes. So, no, I told them that I want to make sure that I end in 5 instead of the 10 allocated, because I'm the last one. I'm sure that other people have gone over. I'm standing with high tea. I'm from America, so high tea means tea with drugs, I guess. I don't know what high tea means. So anyway, so I decided, so I don't want to stop the millenniums from enjoying high tea. I decided, with I'm no caliber to compete with you in words, and so what I'll do is tell you the real story of how this happened. I'm walking in the Marriott in Houston. I'm coming out in a rush, and I get a call from a friend of mine, and he says, Zain, I want you to meet someone. And I said, sure, who is it? He said, this is Mr. Wasif, and this is about February, March last year. And I'm rushing out of the Marriott, the revolving doors, which have those 4 pillars to clobber one of you. And it's going around, and there's this other guy walking in. And I said, sure, I'll meet him. Who is it? He said, this Wasif Rizvi, you got to meet him, and you got to please support the cause. And I said, sure. And by the way, for those who know me, and there are a few people from the US who know me, giving is a blessing if you can, because not everybody's lucky that they have some way to give or an opportunity to give. So if you're able to give, it's because you're freaking lucky. Otherwise you can't give. So anyway, so the door goes in, and guess what? This giant is walking right through the door. I look at him, he looks at me, and we pause. Now, obviously when you see a Desi in a foreign country, you pause, but not in Houston, because Houston, if you see a white guy, you pause. Everybody else is Desi. So you don't pause at every Desi, but I stopped. And I was mesmerized and paralyzed when I saw you in your eyes. He looked at me, and I said, I've seen this man somewhere. And I never met him. And we go away. 3-4 months later, I'm having dinner with, the engineering school of Danani Engineering School. I'm having lunch with Shaukat Danani. And I'm trying to sell him my product, and I'm trying to really gut down on him. So you got to make the deal. And we're about to leave to Australia to watch the World Cup. Now, for those of you who don't know me and my wife, we are divine fans of cricket. We've seen every India-Pakistan game at the venue since 2007. So in October at the Melbourne, India-Pakistan playing, which even though Pakistan lost, I thought was one of the most fantastic games I've seen. We had a booth with 18 people. So I told Shaukat, I said, Shaukat, you got to come to the game with me. I've got the booth. And Shaukat says, yeah, I will do that, but I'm going to Ziyarat. I said, sure, I'll go Ziyarat with you. And then we couldn't go, we couldn't go. Our passport was about to expire in 6 months, our American passport. And so we had to do something, and suddenly we got it, and we land up in Ziyarat. And guess who's leading the Ziyarat? Wasif. And Wasif came up with this idea that he engulfed in me. And I think it took 4 or 5 days. He said, let's endow a chair. And the concept is that instead of teaching religion as religion, why don't we teach it as a subject? And that's where, so thank you for this opportunity. The importance of philanthropy. By the way, I'm writing a book. It's called I Get Everything in Life 2 Days Before I Need It. And I can't figure out as yet why. I do read Fajr prayers, and I used to read it very regularly. Maybe that's the reason. I don't know what the reason is, but whatever I need comes popping in before I need it. So once I commit to something, it comes up automatically from somewhere. I don't know what the magic is. I've had lots of people tell me that you give, you'll get 10 times. I don't know what the reason is. I'm not a scientist. If somebody's out here, please meet me outside and tell me the secret. But when you give, you will never get less. I promise you this. And whenever, and those who know me also know this, whenever I meet somebody for the first time, I tell them this. So this entire room, today is the 3rd, you have 60 days to ask me for a favor. I do that. And Farzana will tell you, my kids will tell you, everyone I meet, I tell them, in 60 days, please ask me for a favor. It could be anything. You could say, introduce me to Rafiq Saab. I could do that actually right now for you. At least till I paid all my installments. After that, it'll be tough. But in reality, please think about giving more than receiving. You become free. You fly. It's a feeling you can't buy. Money can't buy. It's incredible if you start giving everything you have, because then what happens? You become so free. There's no price to it. And our religion, we're gifted. Why? Because we're the only religion, by the way, that guarantees a roof and food to you. So if I give everything away, my food will come from somewhere. As long as I work and make an effort, I don't go to the homeless shelter and sit there, right? That's a guarantee. So we're the only chosen one that have this privilege. Please be givers. And again, please thank you for this institute. My mother, I bless this to my mother, of course, my wife, who allows me to do this philanthropy. Your spouses have a part to play in it for all of you. If your spouse wants a diamond ring versus give it to philanthropy, it doesn't work really well, right? So thank you, Farzana. Thank you, everyone at Habib University. And Zubair, I didn't read my speech, and I didn't make it in time. Thank you so much. Enjoy high tea.
Thank you. That was an incredible tale of synchronicity. There's something magical about this day, and thank you for making it enchanted and magical to our speakers and for the conversation. There's lots more that can be said, but I know people are hungry, and we do have a brief ceremony that I would like to invite President Rizvi to please present Mr. Jeewanjee with a commemorative plaque.
Let me just take the advantage of our Chancellor being present here. I think the picture will look a lot more distinguished, him handing out the plaque to Zain than me. So may I request Rafiq Saab? Sorry. No. Yeah. So just a word about this plaque. You know, if you walk in at the entrance of Habib University, there's a wall of Mohsineen. So the base of this plaque really is a replica of that wall of Mohsineen.
We would like you now also to present a token of appreciation to our keynote speaker this evening, Dr. Sajjad Rizvi. Yes, if you could please also sign here.